The courage to act, the resilience to keep going, and the discipline when motivation fades. This is Great American Underdog with your host, Ron Marvo. Welcome to Great American Underdog, where we share stories that give you the courage to act, the resilience to keep going, and the discipline when motivation fades. If these stories speak to you, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel right now. It helps us get these conversations in front of more people who need to hear them, and it helps us continue sharing stories that can genuinely make an impact. Have you ever felt like you keep reacting to the same thing, repeating the same patterns, or carrying something you thought you already moved past? Today's guest is James Kawainui, a Kahuna, a Hawaiian spiritual priest, author, and speaker who blends ancestral wisdom with modern neuroscience and energy practices to help people release trauma, repattern generational behavior, restore balance, and come back into alignment. In this episode, we're going to talk about oponopono, what true resolution actually means, how to stop giving your energy away, how to look at the part we play in conflict, and how to come back to Pono, the place of right action, balance, and inner harmony. It's my honor to welcome James Kawainui to Great American Underdog. James, how are we feeling today?
Well, hi everyone. I'm feeling great. Thanks for having me, Ron.
It's my pleasure to have you, man. And just from the moment we originally spoke, definitely felt some incredible energy in our conversation. So I just want to get right into it, and deliver some value here for the audience right away. When someone keeps reacting to the same things, repeating the same patterns, or carrying something that they thought they already moved past, what is usually happening for them really beneath the surface?
One is it's happening unconsciously, so they're not even realizing they're doing that. And then once there's a realization, because the pattern is so deep and it's happening in some ways outside of their awareness or their consciousness, it can be challenging to shift and adjust. And that's kind of where the neuroscience comes in, because it's about creating new synaptic connections as we break down the old ones. So when we talk about doing this work, it really is part of it is energy, looking at the emotional, but there's also the science that goes with it as well.
Yeah, I think I totally understand that. You have to there's both that exist at the same time. I'm sure you're familiar with Dr. Joe Dispenza, where he talks about brain and heart coherence and how important that is. But again, like, there is a consistent transfer of energy, especially in conversations, but also with yourself and your thoughts. What's the difference between, observing your own energy and being controlled by your own energy? I know that you mentioned it starts on the inside, but if you could elaborate on that a bit.
Being controlled by your own energy is more about talking about our addiction to the emotional makeup of who we are. You know, the process of habit and pattern is that when we recreate things over and over and over, then it becomes to be embedded. And once that becomes embedded, then it makes it way more challenging for us to step outside of. And then there are levels or multidimensional aspects of that, because there's times where we're behaving or acting in a way that is so deep and so unconscious that it may also be generational pieces. So it depends on what's going on in the moment and where the triggers are coming from. The part of the change is recognizing when the triggers come. So if you look at yourself as a computer, and this is really a good analogy, if you press X on your computer, you get X. If you press Shift X, you get capital X. If you press Control X, everything that you highlighted disappears. The computer doesn't think about what it does. It just does it. And our brains are kind of the same way, because we're wired in that way. We're wired because our operating system really is based on survival. And if you think about a million years ago, and there's a cyber say, 30,000 years ago, and there's a saber-tooth tiger in front of you. And if you kind of went, saber-tooth tiger, what do I do with that? It's not
You
answer,
did.
right? And so the brain adapted itself so that we reacted quicker and quicker to outside stimulus, and especially to danger. So the way that I describe it is, think about it like this. Something happens, my brain and I react automatically. So here's my trigger. Here's my reaction. There's no space inside of there for me to go, I wonder what I should do. And so part of the work, and for me, this is my definition of awareness is the space that between what happens and what I do about it changes. Because then one of the major ways to look at this, I go from reacting to responding. And just from an energetic standpoint, reacting is way different than responding. Reacting means I just do something. Responding means I have time to think and figure out what would be my best path forward. Is that helpful?
Absolutely. I always think about it as like there's like you said, there's a trigger, there's an emotion, and then there's think and decide, and then there's act. But the part that it sounds like most people skip over is the think and decide part. They go trigger, emotion, act, right?
If you look at yourself as a computer, right? And your brain is this amazing computer, it really is. It it's organic, but it's also electrical. So, it's electrical signals that run everything. So if you look at your brain as your operating system, you realize that there are programs in your operating system that you're not aware of. And that's what makes your operating system run. When you turn your computer on, you don't ever pay attention to your computer. And it's been a really long time since we had to do that old thing that we had to do 20 years ago, where you had to go in and defrag your computer, right? The computer would actually remove the temporary files. It would tell you what the corrupted files are. And then it would ask you, what do you want to do about all of this? Right. But now our computers are designed to not, we don't even pay attention to that. So we're not even aware of what's running our program, what's running my life.
Mhm. And the other thing too is like you said before, some of this is generational and it comes from your environment as well as generational. So like the way that you grew up, what you learned from your parents, what you learned from your environment, your colleagues as you started to get older, you kind of get this program, you don't kind of, you get this programming from those experiences and they kind of become embedded into you. And I think even like in today's world, like you mentioned the computer, things just happen automatically when you hit certain buttons. Well, I think that a lot of times now, especially when it comes to focus and energy, people just do things and don't really think about why they're doing them as much or have any level of control over their energy at times or their focus because it's kind of being stolen to them. You have people stolen from them. You have people that understand this at a very deep level. Like, for example, I bring up social media in that way where people could be just what I call doom scrolling and consuming negativity or constantly reacting to what's going on in the outside world. I guess for those people, James, like, how can they tell if one, what they're consuming is expanding them or contracting them, keeping them neutral, but also when to stop? How do they develop the muscle to control where their energy goes?
That's an amazing question. I don't think I've ever had anybody ask me that in that way. But one of the first ways to do it is as you're looking, like, right, as you're scrolling, or even before you pick up the phone and scroll. And in some ways, I'm trapped inside of that as well. I think we all are to some extent. Is to look at that and stop and ask yourself the question that says, okay, so how is this making me feel? Is doom scrolling making me feel any better, any worse? And if it's making me feel worse, why would I want to feel worse? And that's kind of a start of, wow, how often in my life do I feel myself gravitating towards not feeling good about myself, not feeling good about my life, my world, the world around me, and everything else like that. So it's like, what is it really? And for most people, because the act is so unconscious and the addiction, we have to look at this as an addiction because
Yes.
it's the addiction that we're caught inside. It's the addiction of whatever it is, feeling bad, looking at the world the way we look at it. Some people doom scroll because it helps them fire inside of their frustration or their anger or the rage. And so everything they see and everything they do in their life then just brings more of that. And so it becomes like the self-fulfilling prophecy. So where is it and when do I want to stop it? When do I decide for myself that I want to feel better about my life?
It also is like you just said, it's people don't even realize it's happening. It's very much an autopilot thing. I think about, times where I've woken up in the morning and the first thing I do is grab my phone and look on social media. And afterwards, I have said to myself, why did I do that? Right. And you start to be able to catch yourself doing these things that like I shouldn't be waking up and looking at my phone, and especially not social media. I should be waking up and being connecting with myself, maybe by journaling, meditation, a workout, some combination of that, going outside in nature. And I feel like people are so much on that autopilot, James, that they're so disconnected that they don't even recognize it till after the fact. And then they wonder why they might feel overwhelmed or disconnected. So, you talk about coming back into balance. Like, how do people really do that in real life, especially in a very distracted world that we live
Before we talk about that, I want to talk about something that you brought up, and this kind of, and it's not that you glazed over it, but it's in a lot of ways, it's an important point. We do something, and then we realize that we did it. And then what is the next thing that we do? We judge ourselves. And so we judge ourselves and we give ourselves a hard time. And what does that do? It drops us back into the energy of it again. And so the cool thing, these are reframes. Okay. So are we reframing? You might have caught it 20 minutes afterwards and then looked at that and went, oh yeah, there it is. I did it again. At least I have an understanding of it. I'm going to do my best to look at this the next time it shows up and catch myself quicker instead of going straight into self-judgment. So it's about watching. There's a self-judgment is actually the carrot. That's the dangling piece that's out there, because every step into self-judgment is the ego in some ways that goes, there you go, caught you. You have no control, do you? Because I'm the one that's in control. And that's really what's kind of going on. And then to another point that you talked about just before that, it's unconscious. And it's unconscious because it's coming from the part of your brain that is automatically running, which is the back part of your brain, which is your hypothalamus, your amygdala, that ancient part of your brain. It's where all the automated systems in our body is, like breathing, digestion, um, movements. It would be hell if we had to wake up every morning and we had to learn how to move, talk, and walk and chew and everything else like that. So there are automated systems that run our lives. And this is 10, 15 years ago. Scientists realized when they started studying us is that 95% of what we do on a daily basis by the time you're in your mid-30s are automated responses, and you don't even know that that's happening.
Mm.
So this is the breakdown of that, or bringing those kinds of things back into consciousness. But consciousness is the thinking part of your brain, the frontal cortex, which is where we process everything. So when we talk about this, that's why I say it's ancient wisdom and modern science, because it's the science as well. And understanding the science kind of helps us. So back to how do we change that? One is without awareness. And because awareness is the first thing. You don't know you're doing something wrong until you know you're doing something wrong. And that's the beginning point. And then the reality, and you also said it as well, is can I narrow down the time between when I did it? Right. So this is kind of the opposite of what I was talking about. Narrow down the time between when I did it and when I realize what's going on. And so that kind of is in a mirror to the reaction to response, or trigger and reaction. So the more the space between what's going on and how I respond, the shorter the time of when I realize what's happening and what I do about it. Right. And if you try and do this through just your mind, it's never going to work. It's about having to tune into your body now and to start to actually feel what is running and how your emotions and the things are happening inside you. So it's almost as if in order to be present, I have to be in my body in order to be in my body so that I can actually become aware of the emotions or the thoughts that are running through me.
Yeah, again, the awareness piece being so important. My wife calls it
Absolutely.
tapped in, tuned in, turned on, which she's gotten from Esther Hicks and Abraham.
Absolutely. I'm a big Esther Hicks fan. And I'm a big Dr. Joe fan. So, there are pieces inside of that that we look at every day, right?
Yeah, and for myself, and you tell me if this is good practice, but what I like to do also is reverse engineer, right? Like if I want to have different outcomes, I have to do different things, and that starts on the inside, right? So I write down what outcomes I would like for that day, that month, that year, however far you might want to expand it out, and then say, okay, if I want those outcomes, what does my day to day look like now? It can't be I wake up and scroll on social media, and check emails and things. It has to be that I get up and do something for myself, my body, my mind. I have a mantra that I say every single morning that I have on a giant Post-it note in my office, and I go into there, and it has everything to do with my goals and what I want to do in exchange for those goals in terms of the type of energy that I put out. And more importantly, knowing, as you talk about so much that really stood out to me, is how precious our energy is and how and where do we share it. So, could you just elaborate a little bit on that and tell me if you think the reverse engineering thing is a good place maybe for people to start?
No, reverse engineering is a perfect place. There's a couple different things. And so I want to show you my stickers. Okay.
Please.
So here's the first one that says, there's nothing I cannot do, be, or have. That's one. It's right here. When you were talking about that, I was looking at my stickers, and then I have another sticker that says, I'm important too.
I love that.
and and then here's one, and it's always a good reminder. It says, your thoughts determine your outlook. And that really talks about what you were just talking about. So it's about the mindfulness of that, right? So the other place, as we start to reset ourselves, right, is say to look at how we frame failure, because we are adaptive creatures. We work on adaptation. That is really the reason why, as a species, we're still here, is because we learn to adapt and evolve. And so, but the mind takes over, and what it does is it makes failure wrong. And when we drop into failure, inside of that failure, then we go, I'm not good enough. I don't know what this is. I'm stupid. Whatever the thing that happens in your mind, that happens when you're doing that. And yet the shift, and this feels like a very subtle shift, or could be a subtle shift, is that when we land inside of something, really what happened is it didn't work, and I just haven't figured it out yet. So if you step into that place and you go, okay, this is not failure. I just haven't figured this out yet. Let me take a step back, figure this out. And that's the re-engineering that you're talking about. And then now, how can I make this? And what do I do? And what's the outcome that I want? Right. And those are practical steps. And at the same time is watching how my emotional body is also sending me signals about those different pieces.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And even in the standpoint of so many people today, especially doing the comparison game, right? I'm a
Yes.
certain age. I'm a certain age and I'm not where I think I should be. I see other people on the internet that are farther along than I am. I feel like I did everything they did and didn't get the same results. And it's very much like looking at the external circumstance before they look internally at what they're doing with their energy and really aligning themselves to what they value in their own lives and not necessarily what they see out on the outside world on social media, the internet, etc.
Yeah, but I think the part of that is that they don't know what they value in their own lives because they've been told externally.
Uh,
And in a lot of ways, this is an epidemic in our youth because, and I was talking to a client yesterday and she was talking about her two sons, and she's got one son that he's just inside of himself, and he just kind of puts a t-shirt on and he goes through his day. And then she's got her other son and he's there, and he's gosh, I don't know what the word is. it's a new thing. And so he's got all the product, he got the look, he's got the clothes, and he's got everything. Did he actually, did the interior piece of him actually come up with all of that? Or were all of these signals and information that he was getting outside that says, you are not anything unless you are doing these things. And so she's watching the dichotomy of both of her sons and going, my goodness, how do I work through this? And that's one of the things that we were talking about is being able to bring people to a point where we can actually look at that and go, wow, what's important to me? Never mind what's going on outside of everybody. But because of social media and the way that our society and our culture is right now, um, it can be a real challenge to step past that, come back into yourself.
I think again, like you just said, and I make the analogy of you could put on a really expensive suit, but that doesn't make you a businessman. Because who are you on the inside at the end of the day, and how does that energy and your frequency, does it attract back, the things that you're looking for into your life and in your world? And if you're not that on the inside, it doesn't matter what you look like or appear like on the outside, it'll never resonate back to you. The universe knows what's really going on in your subconscious, in your heart, and in your mind.
Here's the thing for people to really understand. Whatever's happening outside of you is a reflection of where you are inside. And so I say this to people, and this might be a really challenging place for most people, is when you start to take responsibility for all the choices that you made and what showed up in your life, that's kind of not kind of, that's when your life changes. And so that process you talked about at the very beginning about Pono. Pono is this Hawaiian concept of balance and harmony. And so part of the balance and harmony, and part of the balance and harmony inside a whole oponopono, is about being able to resolve those conflicts. The process in traditional terms is conflict outside of myself, conflict between me and conflict between myself and somebody, or conflict between me or groups of people. And yet inside of resolving those external conflicts, I actually have to come to a resolution inside of myself and go, okay, so what's driving me? What am I thinking? How am I feeling? Do I need to take responsibility for some things I said or did? And how is it influencing what's happening outside of me? So that idea of pono, of coming back into balance and harmony inside yourself, then becomes really, really important.
Yeah, I
And
remember hearing you on another interview talking about Pono points to right action, righteousness, balance, and alignment. And then when something actually gets resolved, we don't bring it back up. But we're going to get into that in a second, because what I do want to touch on, James, is before I guess you became known for this healing work, and you may have already been known throughout your entire life for it. You got 20 generations of lineage with Kahuna in your family, and you have had that name bestowed upon you. Uh, what did life look like before you fully understood, I guess, these gifts and the weight of that lineage that you are, using today to help other people?
And the easiest explanation, and I will go in depth, but I would say the easiest explanation was it was that I was completely unconscious about what was going on,
Hmm.
and the external world was my controller,
Mm.
and it was really watching that. But to answer your question, I say I have about 5 lifetimes in this lifetime because of all the different things that I've done. But the last thing that I walked away from that really created the shift and the change inside of me was I was a corporate executive in a huge company 25 to 30 years ago. And I was doing the work that I thought I was supposed to do. My direct report was the president of the company. I ran several departments. I had people that worked underneath me. I traveled a lot. There were all the trappings of the good life. And at the same time, though, there was another part of me that was miserable, but I could not take responsibility for not feeling well, because there was this wrestle inside of me going, wait a minute, this is the life you said you wanted. Here it is now. How come you're not happy? And went on like that, and then I had something happen that completely changed everything. And so about 26 years ago, and actually the anniversary is in about 10 days from now.
Wow.
No, about 2 weeks from now. It'll be 26 years. Um, the first time I heard my ancestors speak to me, and they tapped me on, they literally, I was sitting at home by myself with my wife, who's my ex-wife now. And I felt a hand hit me in the back of the head, and I heard a voice that said, "It's time to go home." And I looked at her and I said, "What the F are we doing here?" And she's, "I don't know." And I said, I don't think I can do this anymore. And I literally walked into my boss's office the very next day and I quit my job and I moved
Wow.
back to Hawaii.
Can you explain to me or elaborate on the experience of how you heard your ancestors? I'm so curious about that. Like,
It,
there was
it,
more of a was it more of a feeling than anything?
what in this instant is what they call clairaudience. It's actually hearing a voice. And so inside there's clairaudience, there's clairsentience, there's clairvoyance. You will see. So there's all the clairs, if you want to. There's like 4 or 5 of them. But
Okay.
this is clairaudience, and this is when you actually hear a voice and actually feeling and that took a lot, I think, on their part energetically to actually touch and to do, because they're laws of the universe. And generally speaking, you don't cross that line between spirit and the physical in that way. But there, unless I looked at it as an intervention that happened. And the reality is that I had been hearing, I would say, messages or getting glimpses of things before that happened. And I did not pay attention to them, or I actually purposely
Then.
ignored them. And when that happened, it was so abrupt. But there was a realization in the book that I'm writing. I said, in that moment, everything about my life fell apart and became crystal clear.
Mm.
And it's a weird feeling to be in that place. And so I walked in and I quit my job and I had no idea what was going to happen. I just knew that I could not keep living the life that I did. And then I spent the next 25 years, that's been my journey of understanding what that looked like. I didn't know I had a lineage back then. It was something inside of me. That was part of the journey where I met someone who was a distant cousin from a that we had been we had been disconnected from that part of the family for several generations. And she showed up at my mom's house one day and she said, "I think we're related." And she showed her the genealogy that she had been doing and said, "I think you're related here. And here's where the disconnect is. And you guys are over here and we're over here now. We want to bring you back into the family." And so through that process and that genealogical research, which took her 10 years, she was actually able to go back 16 generations, and which I thought was amazing. But at the same time that all of that was happening and she was doing that, I was going through my journey and I was actually in New Zealand and I had found healers down in New Zealand, the Maori, and they basically found me and said, "Okay, we're going to show you what you're supposed to be doing and how." And so I had my first, in some ways, formal training was with them. And then I got, and then for me, so to answer your question, how do the messages come through? Sometimes it's a thought. And I've learned to discern the thoughts from the mind and what the mind is trying to tell me. And then sometimes there'll be a message like for me, messages are birds sometimes, like like a hummingbird or a hawk or something like that. And in a lot of indigenous cultures, they use nature as the guidance inside of that. Hawaiians are no different, Hawaiian culture. And then the other times there would be, I'm sitting with a person and I keep hearing a word. There's like all of a sudden a word just pops up out of my head. And I say the word out to them and then go, "Oh yeah, that's in relationship to this." And then other times I'm talking with someone or I'm looking at something in my life. And then like a lyric from a song comes on in my head. And the lyric kind of goes right to the thing that I'm looking at or right to the thing that I'm working at with someone. Sometimes it's a movie. And so for people, it comes in different ways. And what I think is that the way that I understand it anyway, is that my ancestors learned how to speak to me, and they had to recognize that they had to use my language and my connections to be able to make that connection so that we can talk. And so if you ask me, how does that happen? James, the man, has absolutely no clue. And I'm serious. And be totally honest with you. He doesn't. And yet inside of that realm, when you hit that shamanic realm and you start talking about multiple dimensions of reality, there's a place in reality where the mystics and the healers and the Akashic record readers and everybody, and we hit. And that's the place where past, present, and future all exist. And there's an ability to see the timeline inside of
Mm.
that. And when you hit that place, that's where the information comes from. And does it happen all the time? No. Does it happen often? It happens often enough. And it my I'm grateful for this. It happens when I'm sitting with people and they're sharing things that have happened in their lives. So it gives me an insight to where they are. And the other part of it is that whatever they're experiencing in a lot of ways, and this is people that are empathic, you feel the energy inside of your own body, and it helps to trigger or helps guide that, because they go, oh yeah, I know what that feeling looks like and or feels like, and then be able to talk to them and say, okay, tell me what's going on here. And they point them to specific places in their body and say, tell me what's happening there. What emotion is sitting inside of that? Let's go a little bit deeper. And so we work through those pieces. And as we're doing that, it's almost as if the conscious mind is sitting over here that's going, what the F? And then there's this other part that's open. Somewhere's the left side of your left brain, the creative side,
Right.
intuitive side that says, oh, okay, let's follow this. So I,
I think
I that was a long answer. I hope that was what you were looking for.
No, please don't ever apologize for the long answer because there was so much detail in there and so many great value adds for anybody listening. Because I think that this also, the way what you just described, goes back to where we started this conversation, which is awareness. And even in my own life, James, there have been times where like I've always felt a higher level spiritual connection in my own life, right? I grew up Catholic and always had this connection to knowing that there's guardian angels and there's Jesus and there's God and there's again, those are all signposts to what I feel like for human beings is this higher level of consciousness and this higher power. No matter what you religion you may practice or not, it's there and it exists, right? It's just how aware are you of it being there? And then second part of that, which you mentioned, which I've experienced in my own life, which is are you purposely ignoring it? Because are you on a path that you think is good for you or that you think you want, and you're getting signs that you shouldn't be going down that path, and you're just continuing anyway until like you had the moment of clairaudience. For myself, I had events that happened in my life that took me down a different path than I could have never predicted those things to happen ever in a million years. And I think that those things happen on purpose, coming back to the higher spiritual guidance that is exists for many people. The question is, are you going to turn your head away from that and your ear away from that and your heart really away from that? Or are you going to lean into that and say, "Okay, I believe that this feels good. This must be the right way," right? So again, that awareness coming back and being so important.
It's creating a level of trust inside of it. And it's also, and we haven't talked about this at all today, but it's about realizing that our inner knowingness, right? I.e., our intuition is there. And what I find over and over and over again in my own life and in people's lives as well is that there are places where you know you're not supposed to do that, but the ego takes over, some other part of you takes over, and you go against your intuition and your inner knowing. And so this journey is about trusting that inner knowing and being able to come back to it over and over and over again. And the more we do that, the more intuition shows up in our lives. Because the thing about it is we all have intuition. It's whether or not we're brave enough, because it's just really, it takes courage to follow intuition and to do the things that may look like on the outside that we're going against the grain.
Yeah. And if you are not trusting your inner knowing and you are connected to a more I think we all have a more spiritual higher power calling in our lives. Your
Absolutely.
ancestors, guardian angels, they're gonna come and be like, oh, you thought you were gonna go down that path? No, 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 I'm not allowing that to happen. I'm really sorry, you're gonna go this way because that's where you're meant to go. And then when you start, I think as you get older and you start to have more of those incidents happen in your life, you start to just say, okay, I have to let that steer. I have to trust that, like you said, trust your inner knowing and your inner guidance system enough to let that steer the ship and then just continue to deep dive in that direction.
And not let your fear overtake things.
Right.
Because that fear, it well, here's one way of looking at this. We all have this amazing ability to imagine. And imagine and manifestation in some ways are very similar to each other, right? If you listen to Dr. Joe, he will say this. And if you listen to Esther Hicks, he'll say this. What is it that you want to create in your life? Can you feel what that feels like? Right? Dr. Joe says exactly that. Can you feel what that feels like? So what you're doing is you're bringing a future event into the present. And so think about this. We have this amazing ability to imagine. And my question to all of you is, what are you imagining? Because most people are imagining the worst things that could ever happen to them. And the reality is that, and I use this as an example. There are two sides to every coin. In other words, that as much as the probability of bad things happening, there's actually a 50% chance or greater that good things can happen too. So it's like, and it comes back again to energy. How am I using my energy? What am I using my energy for? And so there's that place of that trust. There's that place of that inner knowing, that intuition. And then being able to use your imagination, because what you're doing in some ways is you're imagining a future event that hasn't even happened yet. Yet you're imagining the worst things can happen inside of your life. And the thing about it is, it hasn't happened yet. So guess what you're doing? You're creating it in that moment. It's really challenging concept for people to kind of look at that, because they go, yeah, but look at all the crappy stuff that's happening in my life. And I said, yeah, because those are choices that you made in the past that put you in this place.
Yeah, or they take responsibility for things that were never theirs to carry that were put on them,
Oh my
right?
gosh.
So
That's
so
Ron, that's a whole other conversation that we can go into that we
yeah,
spend for
so I
years.
wanna kinda touch on that too because it's like, how can somebody that person, right, trust their inner knowing, take responsibility for their energy and their own actions without taking the responsibility for the things that were never theirs to carry and actually let go of those things? Because I think it is
You
a
know,
thing that people struggle with so often and don't even recognize it because they just think this is how life is for me.
how many people have created careers in their life that their parents wanted?
Mhm.
The parents said, you have to do this when you grow up. You have to be this, and this. You have to be successful, whatever the story was. Right. So you go and you create and you do the thing that they say, or the people at school who think that they know better than you. And I'm not knocking any of that, because advice is really a really good thing. And yet at the same time, it's just recognizing that when or as you move through your life, the things that you're doing, is it coming from your heart, or is it coming from this place of some kind of obligation, or some place that you think that you have to, or some distorted view of what the world and success and what it means to decide for people, for yourself, actually.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I again, it's like also, uh, being able to just recognize it just keeps going back to the awareness piece of your own energy. Good. I thought you were gonna say something, sorry. But it goes back to that energetic, like, piece of it in your awareness. What energetic, I guess, boundaries, if you will, like, how does somebody know if their, boundaries for their energy are weak or not? How can they start to, I guess, make those adjustments so that way, like, hey, like, for example, my parents are trying to tell me to go do this thing. Okay, well, I don't feel that in my heart, but I'm still gonna go ahead and do it anyway. Is there a way for them, I guess, to kind of put on the brakes, if you will, if they need to?
So in some ways, that's a two-part question, or maybe two different questions. So if we come back to first with the energy, and about, and because we're talking about boundaries now, it's about recognizing that one is, this is a given, even though there's, for a lot of people, there's no proof of this. But if you look at all indigenous cultures, there's an inherent understanding that we're all connected. Energy is energy, and it transfers between people, object, places. Okay. And so from that standpoint of understanding, it's recognizing how much of it actually belongs to you. In other words, we're so connected. And because we're connected, we're constantly, from an unconscious standpoint, I should say, from an unconscious standpoint, we're constantly reviewing, checking our environment, feeling where people are, things are happening. And so in that way, there's constant information coming into our awareness that our computer is processing that we may not even be aware of. So all this input, all this information is coming into to help us realize that, if something's hot, where we're going, if this is a dangerous place, all the, whatever it is that we're looking at. And at the same time, then there's a question I ask people: how do you know who you are inside of all of this energy that's
Mhm,
happening? So it's about becoming aware and becoming sovereign, a sovereign being, energetic sovereign being inside of the energy that's around you. So it's recognizing when it, I say it like this: if you're moving through your day, your emotion changes like quickly, like I say, within a second or two, or you realize that your emotional there's been an emotional shift, right? In that moment, to stop, because when it happens, we just realize, oh, we don't even think, stop and say, oh, my emotion shifted or my energy shifted. We just, all of a sudden, we go from being happy to angry, sad to joyful. However, because it happens either way, is to be able to stop at that moment and go, oh, wait a minute, my energy and my emotion just shifted. Here's the question: that shift, that emotion, feeling that I'm feeling in this moment, is that really mine, or is that information coming from outside of me that's trying to tell me something about the people or the situations around me? We don't ever put up a filter or even ask ourselves a question. So we're constantly bombarded. So think about where we are inside of our collective, inside of our, I would say, our culture and our society right now. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of frustration. There's a lot of questions about, are we going, literally, there's questions really about, are we going to survive, or what's going to happen to me, or am I going to have a job? All the different pieces.
mhm,
And here's the easiest way for me to explain this that I think would help. Everybody's been to some kind of a large event, if it's church, if it's a concert, if it's a sporting event, whatever it is, and notice the ebb and the flow of the crowd. Score a touchdown, yay! But except if you're the opposition, it's like, oh no. And so you're inside this sea of people where the energy is going like this, and you're flowing with the energy. And at some point, you get lost, and you're not you anymore. You're this energy that's flowing inside. Concert, your favorite song comes on, everybody's singing, right?
mhm.
Something comes on, it touches you, you cry, you look around, everybody's got tears in their eyes. That's us feeling our environment. And so in that moment, am I feeling me? Am I just emotionally, I'm being emotive because it's James, or am I emoting because there's 20,000 other people emoting with me?
Yeah, yeah.
So when we start talking about boundaries, that's really what we're talking about.
Right. And
Like, and if we had more time, we would talk about that. But that is the best and the easiest analogy that I can give people so that they can actually start looking at how the outside environment is affecting where they are inside of themselves.
yeah, and that's a great segue. It's a great segue for me to go back to Ho'oponopono because I think a lot of times people have this realization of going with the environment, the people that told them go to school for this or do that, and then they recognize it later in their life, and then they carry it with them. They become the
Oh,
victim. They become bitter. They're like, if these things weren't happening in the outside world, I'd be where I'd want to be right now. And I know that Ho'oponopono has to do with resolving conflict. And I know
oh.
ceremoniously in the past, it's like between two individuals, but talk to me a little bit about like how does somebody resolve that conflict inside themselves? Like, whether it's forgiving someone from their past, their parents who maybe drove them in a direction that they truly didn't want, or like find closure and coming back to, as you call, Pono, that righteousness, that balance, that alignment.
And we're gonna talk about it again because we keep coming back to it. We keep landing on this, right? The
It's
first
yeah,
is that there's an awareness that there's something that's out of alignment. There's a disagreement between me and someone else. That we can't find our place back into coming back into agreement or of resolving whatever this is. In the traditional process, it would have been a ceremony with literally a mediator, somebody that sat in between us, so that we could actually speak to each other in a civil way, and also so that we could listen to each other, so we could find out what was going on. Inside of the process, though, we have to do it's and we may have to. I don't like saying have to. Inside of that process, it's important to be able to do the inner work, the self-reflection, because can I get to the place inside of any conflict where I go, wow, is it always everybody else's fault? What about
mhm,
me? What is it that I brought into this? What did I say that might have twisted this? Or what did I say that might have pushed somebody over the edge? Was I saying that from a place of being inside my heart, or was I maliciously trying to hurt them? And once we start to look at all the interactions that we have and going, okay, parts of this that it would be good if I took responsibility for. There's parts of this that I look at that and go, wow, when this happened, this is how I felt. So that level of introspection and I'm going to say healthy and safe self inquiry, because it's not about recognizing. We talked about this earlier. It's not about recognizing that I did something wrong and then feeling bad about it, right? Going into the judgment is just looking at it and going, oh wow, I didn't realize I was doing this. How can I correct this? And really, if you looked in the Hawaiian dictionary and you looked up ho'oponopono, there's only two words that says to correct. That's
to
it.
correct. Yeah,
And,
well,
and so it's the resolving of that,
yeah.
right? How do I resolve those inner conflicts?
How do I resolve the inner conflict? But like you said before, do it in a way where I don't victimize myself
Or
because
the other thing.
or the other person, right? Because a lot of times in conflict, whether it's with family, friends, work life, etc., people say sorry to each other and then they carry it around. It doesn't actually close. And I know with Ho'oponopono, it's you have to close the book and not talk about it ever again. And I think that people say, "I'm sorry," but then they still carry the weight of whether it's for themselves and something they did, and they start to now say, like, "I things would have been differently if I didn't do that," even though, like, "Hey, we already discussed. We're good." Like, this has been resolved. Why are you still feeling bad for yourself and not allowing yourself to move forward energetically?
I think the basis of that for a lot of people and how we actually start to resolve that is letting go of having to be right. Because whenever we're inside of a disagreement, or a lot of times we're in disagreements, each side is trying to convince the other of their rightness and the other person's wrongness. And I know you've been in situations like that, and we all have been in situations like that. So it's really being able to look at that and then the personal responsibility that comes from saying, okay, I contributed to what's going on here. And that piece of permanent resolution, that's a really interesting thing, to not bring anything up again. That means if we're still carrying stuff around, that means there hasn't been a resolution. That means I still feel, for all practical purposes, what's happening is if I'm still holding on to this years and years and years later, that means that I'm still feeling like I was wrong in some way.
Right.
So there is no resolution inside of I was wrong.
Yeah, that makes sense. So talk to me a little bit about James. One thing I want to touch on is you're a kahuna, and I know that a kahu is a priest, and that title, you don't give yourself that title; it gets bestowed upon you. What does that mean to you, and how do you carry that every day with you?
I will say that every day I'm learning how to do that,
Fair. That's fair enough.
you know, because there's a lot of responsibility inside of that, and I've known for years that I came from that lineage, and I know from my culture that it's not something that you call yourself, because you would get to that point inside of our culture in old Hawaii through a process of learning and being recognized in some ways as you grew energetically, spiritually. And so to front the recognition comes from someone who is recognized, that recognizes you for the energy, for the place that you are, for the I would say, um, one of the things in Hawaiians call is ha, which is the humility and the humbleness inside of what you do, because this is not a work that comes from a place of arrogance. This is work that comes from as much as we are human as possible, to be in a balanced state so that we can reflect and see these pieces. And so to have that mantle also means that I have a cultural responsibility to my culture, to act in a lot of ways, because part of Pono is integrity. Part of Pono is authenticity. So there's an integrity and an authenticity, and I know that these are words that people throw around now, because they're kind of like buzzwords right now,
Right.
and yet that piece about Pono is about, am I integrity? Not, I mean, am I in integrity? Not out here. Am I in integrity inside of myself? And and so that level of responsibility. So I can see everything in the world, and yet at the same time is like, if I'm not walking my talk, then I am not that. I'm not carrying the teachings, or I'm not carrying the wisdom in a clear way.
It reminds me very much of businesses when they say, "Oh," I'll use the same 2 words. "I have a culture of authenticity here in my business, and I have a culture of integrity here in my business." And then I say to them, "Okay, well, what are the actions you guys do every day that actually make up that culture?" Because if you can't actually name the actions and, like you said, walk the walk of what makes up that culture, you don't have that culture. So you have to also think. What's that?
Then it's just words. It's just words. Then,
And then they just become words.
yeah.
So in your practice as a kahuna and what you do every day for people, how are you helping them walk the walk more often, James?
To guide them to a place of realizing, the easiest explanation, or one of the explanations I would say, to guide them to a place to recognize the choices that they made and how they feel inside of themselves about the choices that they made. Because a lot of times there's a disconnect um, with what we do, how we feel about ourselves. And so I was laughing because just before we got in the car, I was on another a call with I was on a networking call with people, and they were asking me that. And I said, so when I'm working with people, I'm kind of like the tour bus drivers when I tell them, we I come and I pick you up, right? In other words, we have a session together. And then in that session, we go on this journey, and this journey is to look at the different aspects of your life. And so you're on the bus, we're driving, and then we get to the first stop, or we get to the different stops on the journey. And at those stops, you can stay on the bus and not do anything about it, or you can get off the bus and you can have the experience, and they'll look at that and go, "Wow, am I ready to change this part of who I am?" So when I'm working with people, this is not about healing anybody. And I even say this on my website. If you're looking for somebody to heal you, I am not that person, because that's not what I
Right.
do. This what I'm doing is that I'm helping people go on this journey up to become more self-aware or self-evident about where they are in their lives, and taking responsibility for the choices that they've made, and then watching what happens when when their choice becomes to create different outcomes for themselves. And so the course of this work is that, and then to look at where the patterns are, and where the stories are locked in, and how deep are they? Are they from the things that happened to you in your life, or are they generational, or are they soul driven memories that come? And it all depends on the person and the work and the day that we work together, you know? So
Yeah.
it's watching that and being able to guide people in that way, because of the being able to kind of watch the flow of the energy through their bodies, and the emotions that flow through them as well.
Yeah, that makes total sense, and then when they have the aha moment as you're driving them on the bus and you're the tour guide, then they have to get off the bus and have the courage and resilience, to keep going, right, and to practice every day. So, what is that, I guess, sustainable resilience kinda mean to you versus, like, just forcing yourself to change versus actually having that awareness and being resilient enough to say, "Okay, like, I'm leaving." My wife and I say this all the time, the drive line, racing. When you go through a track, there's a drive line. That's the fastest way through the track. So when we get what we call off the drive line, how do we get back to the drive line? The most smoothest, efficient way. So how do we keep that resilience to make sure that we're getting back to, I guess in your words would be Pono.
Recognize and adjust. If I was driving it on and I was hitting the drive line, I was out, I would recognize that I was out, and then I would adjust. Sometimes it's breaking into the corner. Sometimes it's stepping on the gas as you come out of the corner. And when you're running down, the straightaways, is
I love
figuring out where that sweet spot in the straightaway is, and so and we all inherently know that in different levels of our lives. And now it's bringing it back into this place of the self awareness of where we are. So as we're working through these processes, is recognizing that, and then having, in some ways, kindness and compassion, letting go of the self judgment, so that you can realign yourselves without having to, I would say, the mental machinations of thinking that you did something wrong, because
Mhm.
it's a constant adjustment. They're constant refinements. And you could dig through all the deeper things, and there's always going to be something that's going to show up and say, "So what about this? What about this? What about this?"
Yeah.
And we get to look at that and go, "Okay, here it is. I'm recognizing that it is. Now what do I want to do?" And then we come back in. And so we keep adjusting. It's like they're like minor course corrections, and they may only be a degree, sometimes half a degree,
Right.
sometimes quarter of a degree off. And yet I remember there's a song that I heard that, 1 degree off here is like, 1,000 miles away. A degree off means that Columbus probably never hit the Americas.
Yeah, for sure. That's the in Compound Effect, he talks about that. He's like, you leave from, an airport in New York, and the plane's 1 degree north or 1 degree south, and you were supposed to, I think it was Las Vegas. You were supposed to go to Las Vegas, but you're 1 degree north and you end up in Montana. You're 1 degree south, you're, in New Mexico or somewhere, close to the border there, because of that
Yeah.
just one degree.
One
The
degree. And so it's recognizing it and making the slight course corrections, again,
Yeah,
without going into self-judgment, without doing anything else except realizing and going, "Oh, wait a minute. Let me correct that. Let me come." And that's coming back into Pono, because I realize I'm not in alignment, or I'm not in harmony with myself. Let me come back into that place again. And even if all it is I'm in the middle of my day and it feels like everything's going to hell in a handbasket, and I just stop and say, okay, I'm just going to take 20 seconds here. I don't have to close my eyes, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to focus on my breath, and I'm going to come back into my body, and I'm going to bring myself back to the place that says, now, what do you want to do about the situation that's in front of you? And so we take it out of that automated response and then we bring it back into the space where we become not only coherent or understanding about where we are, but we are empowered to make those choices and those changes.
Yeah, I think that it's a practice, like you just said, too, is getting used to doing that more often, right? Like you have to be resilient enough and courageous enough to recognize, like what goes back to trigger emotion, think, decide, act. Even you gotta be willing to think and decide.
There's also the science, though. There's a science of this because every time we do that, what we're doing is we're not going down the familiar synaptic connection. We're actually building a new road. We're building new synaptic connections in your brain. So if you look at
Yeah,
the science of that, the patterns are on these well-worn synaptic connections. And so they are, what does Dr. Joe say? What aligns together, fires together? I think
yeah,
that's how we
yeah,
right? And so in order to change, we have to realize that I don't want the alignment that's here. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to create new connections. In other words, I'm going to create new patterns. And so that happens through awareness, that happens through accountability, which is why we work with people. That happens through consistency and repetition. Because what we're really doing is we're breaking down old addictions and we're breaking down old patterns and creating new ones inside of us. That is really, in some ways, the nuts and the bolts of this.
yeah. And James, you've been so gracious with your time, man. This has been so powerful for anybody that listens to it. And if they really want to break this down more, where can they find you if they're called to explore this more and want to work with you?
If you go to my website, which is jameskwainui.com,
Wow.
there'll be a way to reach out to me, and or you can just email me.
Cool.
James at jameskwainui.com. I will speak. I do consultations for 30 minutes. So if there's something that's happening in your life, if you reach out, we'll put it on the calendar and we'll get together and we'll have a conversation and then we'll figure out where all of that goes, what the next steps could be, maybe what's happening underneath the surface that you may not be aware of. And then decide that if we're going to get on the bus together.
Yeah. Let me be your tour guide. Yeah, exactly.
Let me be
I,
your tour guide. And that's part of the responsibility that I have is to help people. I see it this way. I'm wanting to help people see and become the best version of themselves. And the more you're able to do that, the more you're going to have impact in the world. And,
yeah.
and I'm going to say impact, but positive impact in the world. And that's really why we all came to be here.
Yeah, no question, and to impact each other. You've been impacting me for the last hour or so, James, and you've been my tour guide for the last hour because there's a lot of things that you dropped that have even been again selfishly for being a podcast host for me as well as the audience. So I really genuinely appreciate you. I'm super grateful for you. Before we close out, I have one last like fill in the blank question
Sure.
and answer. I think I may already have an idea of where you might go with this, but I want to hear it from you. And it's sorry about that break. It's the world needs more people who.
It's funny when you ask me that, there are three words that came up that world needs more people that are aware of what's going on and have the kindness and compassion to start to make real change.
I love that. Any last things you want to leave with the audience, James?
I would say if I left you with one thing to today that will help or may help start to turn the needle, come aware of the words that you use to describe yourself in your day. And you might be shocked at how much disparaging words you use. And instead of going straight into judgment, just look at that and going, okay, can I find a different word that's more positive or find a different word that's more uplifting to describe who I am and where I am inside of my life? So just watch your words. You know, that's why they call it spelling, because every word is a spell.
It's so
And so
true.
if you every word as a spell, as an incantation, you would walk through your day and you would use your words in a way different way.
Yeah, and your subconscious, doesn't know the difference of what you tell it, it doesn't know if it's positive or negative, it's just like, "Oh, this is what you're telling me about yourself? Okay, I believe it, thank you." So
So let me
so
give you
j
more of the same.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much, James. Again, grateful to have you on here, and thanks for being so gracious with your time. This has been an incredible episode of Great American Underdog, where we share stories that give you the courage to act, the resilience to keep going, and the discipline when motivation fades. We'll see you on the next one.